And I think the biggest issue is, you just mentioned it, it's going to fall on the coaching staff. Is X coach wasting X player? I mean, that's always what we hear. That's one of the biggest fun. I mean, and we do parallel each other in that category. Like, at some point, one AFC championship game, it's just not enough. Like, it's just not good enough. Not a fun offseason for those. I think that's one of the bigger, I mean, not that it's like overly narrative based, but one of the bigger talking points is that sucks. So whoever isn't going to make it there has to listen to that probably pretty loudly. He can't beat Lamar Jackson now. Now he's firmly, Josh Allen is even better than Joe Burrow. So now you're firmly won in 2020 when no one else was there beside the Chiefs. You still weren't going to beat the Chiefs anyway. So you have that big cloud. Can Sean McDermott? You fire Sean McDermott, which they wouldn't do. So ultimately, you have all that discussion over one result on Sunday night. And I mean, probably equally so, you could speak better to the Ravens side of it. Like, if they're unable to do it and Lamar drops to 3-5 in the playoffs and similar stuff. Now, he can't get it. He's great in the regular season. Can't seem to get it done against these top guys. Like, that sucks too. So that's equally as bad of a narrative that you're going to have to deal with all off season, which, coach, I don't know, would the seat be warm for Harbaugh if they lose to the Bills and they can continue not to beat a good playoff team? I guess we'll start there.
I would say it would be warm. Definitely. Yeah. I don't think that they would make a move, because it would have been a different conversation if they had lost last week. Yeah. But I just think for me, I'm so growth-based in the playoffs, where it's like one AFC championship game, like you said, it's not good enough. And I mean, are you content with just losing in the wild card or divisional every single season? Like, that's clearly not good enough. And for Lamar Jackson, he just turned 28. And, how many years of peak of his powers Lamar Jackson do you have left? And, that could be 5 years. It could be 3 years. It could be 7 years. I mean, whatever that timeline is, this is a really good Ravens roster. And the conversations around Lamar, yes, he has not played up to standard in the playoffs for the most part. That is apparent. I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's the best playoff quarterback in history, because he's not. He's far from it. But I do think that we've kind of overtuned those conversations about Lamar, because a lot of it also had to do with the coaching staff getting away from their identity. They had 6 running back carries in the AFC Championship game last season. They did a much better job against Pittsburgh. They had 50 carries, 50 rushes against Pittsburgh. And look, they went to the well from the first snap. Steelers couldn't stop it, and they said, yeah, you're not stopping it all game. And that's how they won. But it would be an interesting conversation for Harbaugh, because there is controversy here in Baltimore about his decision-making, his time management, and there's no doubt that the players love him. He's a player's coach, and these guys will go to war for him and go to bat for him any day of the week. But it's not that for John Harbaugh that he's a bad coach to the point where, like, if he got fired, no one would want to hire him. There'd be 25 teams lining up out the door to go hire John Harbaugh. But sometimes things just run their course. And whether that would be the case for Harbaugh and the Ravens if they lose to Buffalo in this game, I'm sure those conversations will be had. But if I had to give an initial prediction, I probably would say they wouldn't do it.
It's just really interesting how close of a matchup this is, because I tweeted something similar to today, and I'll get into that in a sec. But, Kevin and I were talking about it too, and I was saying that this is a huge game for Sean McDermott, because for the same reasons that you just said for John Harbaugh, I don't think that the Bills will fire him if they drop this game. But there's going to be that section of Bills fans that say, get rid of McDermott because he can't win the big game. So I would argue that this is more of an important game for McDermott than it is for Allen. But to the outside world, to people who don't actually watch the game as much as we do, Josh has already proved himself. But to them, he could put up 10,000 total yards and it still wouldn't be enough. So Josh is going to have to win this game too. And like you were saying, Lamar is going to have to prove that he can be a winning quarterback in the playoffs and not have a losing record, because if he drops this one, he goes to 3-5. So that being said, what I was tweeting today, I said that the average weight of each starting offensive lineman, the Ravens is 325 and Buffalo is 320.8. So I was kind of surprised, because I figured, you always hear this talk about this tough physical brand of football that Baltimore plays. So I wanted to look into it a little bit more. And I was like, really? They only weigh about, on average, 4 pounds more than the Bills do. And the Bills have proved this year that they can play just as tough and physical, because if you saw that game last week against Denver, I mean, they really won up front. But the difference is Baltimore has a 247-pound human wrecking ball for a running back, a 300-pound fullback, and you guys have the number one run defense. But you look at it from the Bills side, Josh Allen is also a wrecking ball in his own right. He can truck linebackers. He's probably the most physical quarterback in the league. And Kevin and I were talking about earlier how the Bills have been using Alec Anderson consistently well as that 6th offensive lineman. And that's really helped pave the way for James Cook. And they also use multiple different run formations against the Broncos this past week. So I feel like every way you look at it, it just kind of cancels out, right? Like, it's hard to compare Derrick Henry to Josh Allen, but for the sake of this conversation, you would say, okay, Henry and Allen cancel each other out. And then if you want to talk about Patrick Ricard and Alec Anderson, maybe those two could balance each other out. And then the number 1 run defense against Joe Brady's offense that is 2-dimensional. And then from the standpoint of they both use multiple tight ends. So it's just like every way you look at this, it just seems like it's going to be a back and forth game. So before we like really get into the X's and O's, could you just speak on that a little bit more? And I'm curious to see your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a smash mouth physical football game on both sides. I do think that when people think Ravens, obviously it is that brand of football, but I mean, Buffalo plays that way too. And you mentioned it with kind of how physical Buffalo's offensive line can be, and whichever team ends up out physicaling the other is probably going to win this game. I think that's one of the biggest keys for both of these sides, because the way that Derrick Henry and James Cook get going, I think they're both players that get more dangerous as the play develops further and further. We're obviously both guys, they can do one cut, they can do all that stuff with the line of scrimmage, evade tacklers and pick up positive yards. But Derrick Henry specifically, he gets more dangerous as the play goes on, because it is like he's a human wrecking ball. And as that ball starts to swing and gain momentum, it's harder and harder to bring him down. So when you get to the second level of the defense and the third level of the defense, it's going to be a matter for Buffalo's defense of getting guys who are willing to come in and hit him. And I know I'm not made for that job. If Derrick Henry was coming at me in 20-degree weather, I'm getting out of the way and saying, have fun in the end zone celebrating. But these guys are going to have to put their bodies on the line. And that's the same thing with Baltimore's defense, where you're going to have to work through some physical offensive line combinations. The Bills going to get their guys to the second level to try to spring James Cook free on a lot of these plays. And not only that, but as you mentioned, the Bills can use those 2 tight end personnel sets and multiple tight end sets to either work play action off of, which Baltimore's done and Buffalo has done, I think, pretty well this season. And it's not just a matter of, hey, we're going to put 4 receivers on the field or passing the ball. Obviously, Josh, the QB draws and short yardage situations, things that both the Ravens and the Bills excel at. So you're right. You kind of look at it on paper and, yes, the Bills run defense season-wise has been 19th in net yards per attempt. And you can look at conversions, 3rd down, 4th down, red zone and all that. But I do think that they match up pretty evenly well. I mean, I've been kind of saying on my show on Locked On Ravens that it's a toss-up in a lot of different ways, but it's going to come down to which team can stop the other on the ground and which team can out-physical the other one.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at too, because as much as I keep going back and forth and saying, okay, these kind of balance each other out, that's an even draw right here. The one thing that kind of sticks out to me is that I believe that the Ravens used 6 offensive linemen against Pittsburgh,
Yes.
right? I don't know if it was consistently throughout the whole game, but they had 7 players, including Ricard, who weighed over 300 pounds. And if they do that, on top of, you also sometimes put 5 guys on the line of scrimmage on defense as well. So if they put an extra lineman on offense and or defense, that could be the deciding factor, because as people are saying in the comments here, this game really will be one of the trenches.
I 100% agree. And to your point about the 6th offensive lineman, they used Josh Jones, a Houston offensive lineman who was with the Texans and the Cardinals. I think he was a 2nd, maybe 3rd round pick, if I'm remembering correctly, a couple of years ago. He was on the field for 15 snaps, and they would report him as eligible and have that whole conversation happen before the snap. But they were using him in a lot of different situations to either spring Derrick Henry free, collapse on plays, move bodies. And that's what the Ravens are going to try to do to the Bills. And I know the Bills have a bit of a lighter defensive line, and I know the rotation has changed since these 2 teams last played. They brought in a couple of familiar faces. I know Jordan Phillips is one of those names. And, it's a different defense than what the Ravens saw in week 4. I mean, obviously, when you have 3 of your top defenders out, it's going to make a difference. But it's a matter of being able to key in on this running game. And in terms of even stopping Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, we saw the Steelers do in the wild card round was they went all in on trying to stop Derrick Henry early. They sent all their bodies at him. They essentially said, Lamar, you're going to be the one that has to pull the ball. And he did. And he was picking up 8 yards, 12 yards, 13 yards, 7 yards. He was gashing. And so in the second half, Pittsburgh had to adjust and had to take away that option. They had guys scraping down and obviously fill guys. And the Ravens just said, okay, well, now Derrick Henry, it's your turn. Like, now you can go and feast. And that's what happened in the second half. So it's about gap discipline. It's about filling your assignment and team football. I mean, that's the big thing. And it's been kind of how you defend against some of these teams like Baltimore and obviously Buffalo with their potent run game as well. If you don't do your assignment, and, you know, it's not all about you have 12 tackles in the game. It's about freeing up the guy behind you to go make a free tackle and have a free running lane for them to get to a guy. So the Ravens will go heavy and the Bills will have to match. I know Buffalo loves nickel. They love playing base. It's just going to be a matter of them sizing up and being maybe a bit uncomfortable in their packages. But I think it's the only way that they're going to be able to consistently try to slow down this Baltimore run offense.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And we talked last time in week 4. I mean, look, Baltimore lost their first 2 games. They scraped by Dallas. And we talked, I mean, Baltimore at the time needed it more, period. Like the Bills division stunk. You didn't fully know that yet, but there were some signs pointing to that the AFC East wasn't going to be good again. There's just so much bluffing of the top other 3 teams in the division. And the Bills went in, they went in shorthanded. Like you mentioned it, 3 of their best, especially best players around the line of scrimmage. Taron Johnson is an extremely underrated run defender. He's a really good slot corner, but the reason the Bills are comfortable in nickels, not because they're so stuck in their ways and they won't change. It's because of him. If he wasn't on the roster, they'd play more base, period. He is that good and a big mismatch that, like, he can win at the line of scrimmage, but then he can cover. So ultimately, if something happens where he's now in coverage, the Bills feel really good about that situation as compared to maybe Dorian Williams, who can't cover. So the Bills will feel a little bit better in that situation to where, yes, maybe against Henry, they'd have a little bit better of results with Dorian on the field, maybe. But ultimately, such a liability now with Likely and such a liability with Mark Andrews, it starts to matter. And the Bills still feel comfortable enough that the net difference in run losses isn't enough to take them off the field. And I still think you'll see Dorian at times, maybe against the 6 offensive linemen. But outside of that, they're really going to limit the amount that they take him off the field. And there was one of the bigger losses was Terrell Bernard. It wasn't even Matt Milano the first time these teams played. Terrell Bernard calls his defense. He moves the defensive lineman. You can watch some clips over by my guys at Cover One where he literally moves about split seconds before the snap and equals success. When he's off the field, the difference between Baylon Spector and Dorian Williams to Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard is one of the biggest difference. Not against the Ravens. In general, the Bills went in the same linebacking core we were talking about week 4. The Bills played in the playoffs against the Chiefs. It was not good. And we saw the same results by the Ravens. They were able to mimic what the Chiefs did pretty much in the week 4 game. Bills are too shorthanded in that. Should have been more obvious than it was to Bills fans at the time. But now we can look back on it and be like, that's not a good front to stop a good offense. They're not going to win against many teams with more than 5 wins. It's just not going to happen.